Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Girl in Love with Tech podcast. My name is Rachel Irabor. I'm a Microsoft Lens student ambassador, a Power Platform developer, and a Dynamics 365 CRM developer. This podcast is recorded live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and also on my YouTube channel. And you can get the recorded podcast episode on Google Podcast. You can get it on Spotify, Instagram, and you can also get it on Anchor Podcast and the names I mentioned before. So, in today's podcast episode, we are going to be discussing about Microsoft Azure with Abdul.
Hey
Hi,
Rachel, how you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you. So,
Thanks for having me.
thank you very much for accepting my invitation. Yeah. Okay. So we are going to be discussing about Microsoft Azure, how you can get started, and also we are going to be discussing about Abdul's personal experience with Microsoft Azure as a cloud architect. Hi, Abdul.
Hi there.
Yeah. Please, if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Abdul Kazi. I'm a cloud architect. Been working with Microsoft Azure since 2014,
Wow.
and I work with Microsoft partners and mainly with enterprise customers, mid-market customers,
Yeah.
different verticals. And my main focus has been on the infrastructure side, infrastructure and platform as a service side.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's amazing. That's nice. Yeah. And I think one major question I want to ask you is, especially for our listeners, people are a little bit confused when it comes to Azure because Azure is branched in so many different areas. So when they get to start learning about Azure, or they are trying to understand Azure, or maybe the first time they are hearing about it, they are trying to understand, okay, what is Azure? What is Microsoft Azure? So to you, what do you think Microsoft Azure is?
great question. So Microsoft Azure is a public cloud offering from Microsoft.
Okay.
Um, where you can host your services. So let's say you are a startup. Okay,
Yeah.
I guess we'll run on multiple scenarios. So let's
Yeah.
say you are a startup. You do not have any environment today. You don't have any email. You don't have any servers. You don't have anything, and you're like, we don't really want to invest in hardware. We do not want to buy any servers,
Yeah.
Dell, Lenovo, we don't want to buy storage. We don't want to have a data center. So
Okay.
the first environment for that is Microsoft Azure, and that is known as a greenfield environment where you do not have a existing environment and you're
Yeah.
building from scratch.
Okay.
Now, on the other side, uh, let's say you are a customer, you have your own data center, which is
Yeah.
technically a private data center, or you have a data center with one of the telecommunications, like your
Okay.
ISP, internet
Yeah.
service provider, which is known as a telco, like any telcos.
Okay.
So and you say, okay, I want to move to the cloud for services.
Yeah.
So what in that scenario, that is known as a brownfield environment, and majority of the customers that have a presence on-prem, they're
Yeah.
not going to be going 100% to the cloud, right? They're going to have some sort of hybrid environment. So it
Yeah.
really depends on the scenario that they want to do. One of the I guess one of the perfect scenarios for moving to Azure is, let's say, if you have a project, if you have a development project, okay.
Okay.
So let's say your company makes a software, and
Yeah.
you have a big dev and test development and testing arm. You do a lot of R&D, research and development.
Okay.
Now, and the project is only for 6 months, right? So
Yeah.
it would not make sense for a company to buy hardware, storage,
Yeah.
you
True.
know,
True.
order the equipment, bring it in, rack it, and then set it up. That time alone is going to be huge because you
Yeah.
somebody
And
has to go
expensive.
out. Exactly, right. It's
Yeah.
because not only expensive but even time consuming. Think about it. Somebody has to order the physical hardware. It might come in. It might get the project
Delayed.
might get delays, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, keep in mind from a cost aspect, that's more on the capital expenditure, meaning you're
Yeah.
investing, you're buying that outright. So the downside of that is it becomes a sunk cost, meaning you've already paid it. There's nothing you can do about it now, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
true.
on the flip side, when you're moving to Microsoft
And
Azure, what you can do is for that 6 months project, you can uh, buy the services for whatever the project related is, and
yeah.
then after 6 months, you can just uh, blow up the environment. So you
Okay.
and the good thing is you're paying as you go model,
Yeah,
meaning whatever.
I was about to mention that now. That's what I love about Microsoft Azure. Is like pay as you go, pay for what you use.
Exactly right, and
Yeah,
think it from your personal aspect. It's just like a utility bill. So when you consume electricity or power,
yeah,
you're only paying for what you're
yeah,
consuming, right?
yeah.
The
You're
same
paying for
thing
it.
with Microsoft Azure. It's not like yeah. So and that model is like, but obviously if you're in the enterprise space,
Yeah,
people have the luxury of buying in bulk, or they might even do reserve instances, or there are other things that they can do, so their price is
okay.
fixed for one
Yeah,
year or 3 years. But yeah, there are multiple scenarios how
yeah.
and why people would be using the
Microsoft
Microsoft
Azure.
Azure, right? So that's a perfect scenario. The other scenario is, let's say if you want to expand,
Okay.
or you're looking for highest availability, so that's another perfect scenario. So um,
Yeah,
a perfect example I would think of is, so in North America, Taylor Swift, and I actually live in Canada, right? So
yeah,
Taylor Swift is very popular here. People want to go to her concert. So
yeah.
when her tickets went on sale, the website, the Ticketmaster website, crashed.
Mm.
So people were
Okay.
not able to buy tickets. Think about it, right?
Yeah.
So if it was properly provisioned, if you were in the cloud, you can
Okay.
scale up, because that's the beauty of the
Yeah,
cloud.
true. That's very
Right?
true. Yeah.
Scales up at a given moment, and then you can scale it back down, so you're not paying that cost. Like if you bought the hardware yourself, you would
Yeah.
already, as I said, you're invested, right? So you have to think about the capacity you want. But with the cloud, it can go up, it can come down.
Can
So
come down.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of cost savings as well.
Yeah.
The other good thing is security.
Yeah. True. Secure.
We're hearing every single day about ransomware, and a lot of leaks are happening. Um, I think last week, MGM in Vegas, they got compromised. And the funny thing
Wow.
about that is, it was because of social engineering. So somebody called the help desk. They said, "Hey,
Oh,
They said, "Hey, I'm this person." They did not have the proper procedures for security. So um, you
okay.
know, so security is becoming paramount now, and
Yeah.
Microsoft investing. The last number I remember was $1 billion
That's a
uh,
lot of money.
per year. Actually,
Yeah.
security alone, because they know this is their bread and butter, right? Like a lot of companies. So even think about all the major corporations, your
Yeah.
major banks, your major airlines,
Yeah.
major telecommunication companies. Everybody is moving to the cloud because um, it's really economy of scale, right?
Yeah.
Because you're sharing, although you're sharing that space, it's it's on your own, so you're renting the
Yeah.
space, if you will,
And it's safe.
and it's very safe. It's very
Yeah.
safe. That's how it makes it happen. So
Yeah.
now people might be asking, okay, what does that even mean from a services standpoint? So
Okay.
although Azure offers a lot of services, 200-300 services, honestly I cannot even keep track them now, but
Yeah.
the three main services that people are going to be using regardless of what they're using. So the first one is going to be your compute, um, which is going to be your the memory, the processing power,
Yeah.
whatnot. So wherever you want to move to Azure,
Okay.
the resources that you would need, so that you figure out. So let's say you want to run a virtual machine in Azure, so you'll say, okay, how much memory
Yeah.
do I need? How much processing do I need? You know,
Okay. Yeah.
um, that's going to dictate based on your use case. So let's say
Yeah.
if you are using a CAD software, which is an engineering software, a lot of
Okay.
architects use that.
Yeah.
That is a very highly intense processing need. So that would have a higher compute than, let's say, if somebody's working in a factory and they just need to check their email. You know,
Yeah.
so that's
That's
going
true.
to be different. Um, the
And
second one is networking. So regardless what you do in Azure, you will always need networking. And
yeah.
so people should master networking if you want to work in Azure, because
Okay.
um, Azure itself is huge, but if you're
Yeah.
doing
Azure
hybrid,
is a lot. It's really, really a lot.
exactly, right? Because think
Yeah.
about it, networking is just basic. Your IP scheming, your subnets, your VNets, those
Yeah.
things come into play. And then with the enterprise customer, it gets complicated because once you have firewalls, you might have multiple firewalls.
Okay.
Then you are dealing with other things. So let's say if you are an enterprise customer, you would be dealing with Express Route.
Okay.
Um, and then with Express Route, you'll have to set up BGP.
Yeah.
So that becomes complicated. So you really need to know your networking for that.
Okay.
And lastly, the third one is storage. Think
Storage.
about it.
Yeah.
You're producing so
So
much
very
data
important.
now on a daily basis, right? So
Yeah.
how are we gonna secure that storage? How is that storage being allocated,
Okay.
and who has access to the storage, right? Because
Yeah.
first thing first, what kind of storage are we needing? So let's say, um, you know, you have a e-commerce website.
Yeah.
Okay, so Amazon. So think about Amazon.com. They must
Yeah.
have a huge amount of storage because there's a lot of transactions
A lot
happening.
of products. Yeah.
Exactly. And then how safe is that storage going to be? Because that's customers' personal data. You want to make sure that storage is safe,
Yeah.
right? And then there has to be data classification to that data as well, because
Yeah.
some data might be confidential, some might be
Managing.
sensitive. So
Yeah.
there's classification. And then the other thing, coming back to the cost. So
Yeah.
in storage, there are mainly three tiers. Your hot tier, which is
Okay.
readily available storage. Then you have the cold storage,
Yeah.
which you can have a timeline. Let's say 60 days, you can have access to it. And then
Yeah.
there's another third tier is archive, where um, that storage goes into backup tapes, even from an archiving standpoint. and
Okay.
and depending on the need, because let's say you are working in a financial industry, or let's say if you are kind of any government, right?
Yeah.
What happens there is they might need to keep that data for 7 years for auditing purposes. So
Okay.
now the retention of that
Yeah.
data is longer. So you have to kind of figure out, okay, at what point does that hot data become cold? And
Yeah.
then from cold, it goes to archive. So
Okay.
those are
I
the
think there's a question I want to ask you there. Like I me for my own standpoint on Power Platform, they get to talk about retention, how long you want your data to stay. So does that happen also in Azure, in Microsoft Azure?
it does, absolutely. It does. Because retention is always key, right? Companies want to keep data for retention purposes, for legal purposes,
Yeah.
for auditing purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah, retention is huge. And the other thing is we're creating every day so much data now
Yeah.
that companies need to retain that.
Okay.
And there are multiple copies of the data. So as they might be like a 3x backup policy where you would have data stored in your data center, then you
Okay.
might have a copy stored in the cloud, and then
Yeah.
you might have a copy stored somewhere else in a different region altogether,
Yeah.
right? Because let's say you have a requirement to keep data for 7 years now. uh, what happens if there's an earthquake, or what
Okay.
happens if some sort of disaster in that region?
Yeah.
You might lose that data. So that also you might have to have that data in another region as a backup.
Okay. That's really amazing. I've actually not thought about that before. That's really amazing.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
that's the thing people don't think about when you are architecting a solution, right?
Yeah.
Um, you really need to think about this upfront because there are functional requirements. Uh, Meaning, why is the customer moving to the cloud? So they might be looking at feature sets and whatnot, but there are
Yeah.
non-functional requirements as well. So the non-functional requirements could be high availability because
Okay.
let's say you're selling a product, you cannot afford to have your website down, so that comes into high
Okay.
availability, right?
Yeah.
Again, backup is another uh, requirement. Then
Yeah.
disaster recovery could be another requirement as well. So
Okay.
those are the things from an architect standpoint we need to think, because when you're
Yeah.
building, so think about from a house, right? When you're building a house, you have to think, okay, is the foundation strong or
Yeah.
not?
Foundation.
Uh,
Yeah. Very
and
important.
there's something known as landing zone, which is covered pretty much across the public
Yeah.
clouds. So it's not
Yeah.
limited to just Azure, but AWS and GCP as well. So when I'm working with customers, I usually do a review of Azure landing zone. Uh,
Okay.
what that means is just making sure that before you bring your workloads into
Yeah.
Azure, your
Okay.
environment is, or your environment has a solid foundation from a
Yeah.
security aspect, from a
That's
networking
amazing.
aspect,
Yeah.
the different facets you're looking at. So yeah, so those things have
Yeah.
to be thought beforehand, and that's why I've done quite a bit of blogging. And if you look at
Yeah.
my blog, I have spoken quite a bit about Azure Landing Zone. I've talked about zero trust. That's another thing from a security aspect people have to
Yeah.
think about. Uh, and then to your point, right? Azure doesn't work in isolation. It goes
Okay.
hand in hand with Microsoft 365 now, because
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
you still need identity. Somebody has to have
Yeah.
that account to secure the resources, or those resources might have some interrelationship with Power Platform. So
Okay.
all of Microsoft products now are interrelated at some point. So
Yeah. Collaboration, like it's so yeah. I love what they are doing though. It's amazing.
exactly, right. So
Yeah.
that's what you need to figure out from that aspect. One thing about Azure, it's flat, okay? And what
Okay.
I mean by that is, so in my previous life, I used to be a system admin, okay?
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. You
so
said your previous life. Yeah.
it's been a while. I guess, yeah, it's been quite a bit of time. So
Yeah.
what that meant was I was managing a physical environment, so servers, firewalls, routers, email. So I used to manage Exchange, Microsoft Exchange server,
Okay.
um, Cisco switches, and whatnot.
Yeah.
And when you are in an enterprise environment, uh, because there's such large environment, you get siloed. So one person, or actually not one person, even one department would be
Okay.
covering uh, just servers. The other department would be networking. So all the
Okay.
firewalls, the routing, switching
So
would be coming under, right? The
it's
other
divided.
department, yeah, the other
Yeah.
department could have storage under there, so SANs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And they used to work in isolation. But now with the cloud, it's
Yeah.
flat. So if you're about to set up even a basic service, you
Yeah.
would need to build up your compute, storage,
Okay.
networking, those basic things. So that's why having a strong foundation of
Yeah.
these things are paramount. So I would say, start, if somebody wants to get into Azure, go through the
Yeah.
AZ900. um,
Yeah, it's a 900 is actually really nice. I think like most of the things you just mentioned now, I understood it very well because of is at 900. So going through it on the Microsoft lane is actually amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, I've
Yeah.
actually took that exam, and I was kind of honestly overwhelmed by that too, because there were
Yeah.
so many services that I did not even know existed. Because
Yeah, it's
all,
a lot.
you don't work with all the services in Azure, so
Yeah.
uh, and Microsoft keeps releasing all the services. So the
Yeah.
good thing about the AZ900 is it gives you an overview about what the services are. Plus,
Okay.
I would say also go with the Azure Data Fundamentals as well, because data is
Yeah.
becoming paramount now. Whatever you are
Yeah.
going to be doing, you will touch data. So have a
Yeah.
good knowledge about data, because it is going to come together with Azure as well, right?
Yeah.
As I mentioned, storage.
Yeah.
You
I think
have,
the data has Azure. It has Azure included in the Azure SQL and some other things in the learning
correct.
part. Yeah.
Correct, correct. And
Yeah.
think about it, right? Like even people are specialized in data. So when we
Yeah.
talk about solution architect really is a generic term, okay?
Mhm.
And
Okay.
then you can start specializing. So you could be a cloud architect, which is
Yeah.
more on the infrastructure side. Then you can be a data architect, which is mainly dealing with data. And now, like we have
Yeah.
so much data, right? SQL Server, MySQL,
Yeah.
MongoDB, and that's they're like the floodgates are open with so many third-party open source
Yeah.
data that you can do,
Yeah.
and you specialize in data as well.
Yeah. True.
Then you have the DevOps architect as well. So people
Okay.
are doing DevOps.
Yeah.
So in even in the architect solution architect world,
Yeah.
there's so much specialization that's happening, and even within Azure, there's
Okay.
specialization. So that's why I said I'm mainly focused on the infrastructure side. So
Yeah.
Azure, and when you move to the cloud, there are main three, I guess,
Yeah.
uh, ways you can go into the cloud. So you can go through the infrastructure as a service,
Yeah.
platform as a service, and
Service
software as a service,
and
right?
yeah.
So
SAS. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
the infrastructure as a service
Wait,
is
I think I have a question to ask you, especially for like our listeners. Maybe this is the first time that you're hearing about Microsoft Azure. There's something you mentioned from the beginning. You mentioned Microsoft Azure being a public cloud service. So, in case most of every person here they listen to that and they do not have an idea what that means, what is a public cloud service?
yeah, public cloud service means anybody can go and get that service, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So think about you're renting an apartment.
Yeah.
Uh, you go when you rent apartment, you rent a room in that apartment, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and the services are shared services.
Okay.
So you might have a parking. Although you might have your own parking, but the parking lot is shared. Um, you know,
True.
there could be cooling or heating, which could be shared as well,
Yeah.
depending on how that is. So that's the concept of public cloud. Is some of the services are going to be shared,
Yeah.
whereas compared to private cloud, you completely own it.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
would own the hardware. You would own, you know, you would be responsible for the cooling. You would
Yeah.
be responsible for if the hardware breakdown, that's your
Okay.
responsibility.
Yeah.
In the public cloud, Microsoft take cares of the hardware, so you don't have to worry about hardware. If the server goes down, that's their responsibility. They provide you what is known as a SLA, service level agreement,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
True.
based on the service.
Yeah.
They're going to provide you that service level agreement saying, hey, hardware cannot go down, or the
Okay.
hardware cannot go down. So that's uh, much better, because then
Yeah.
people in IT can focus on developing software or maintaining
Yeah.
software rather than just taking care of the
Same.
physical
Yeah.
environment. So that's huge.
Yeah. I think there's also one thing I'm curious about, as you just mentioned, private cloud. There's something I'm curious about, and that is hybrid cloud service. Because if they mentioned on the Microsoft Learning part, where the public cloud and the private cloud comes together. So, how does that work?
Yeah, good question. So Um, Majority of the customers who are enterprise grade or larger customers, they already have they have their own data center, which
Yeah.
technically is private cloud. Okay.
Yeah.
Now customers are looking to expand into public cloud for scalability or high availability.
Yeah.
They're not going to shut their private cloud, right?
Okay.
The public cloud is going to be a extension of
Wow, that's
their,
amazing.
right? So that is known as a
Yeah.
hybrid cloud. And I'll give you a couple of scenarios. So
Okay.
customer has their own private data center,
Yeah.
okay? But it's only one data center, okay?
Okay.
Now they're saying, okay, we need to have high availability, or the other scenario could be disaster recovery, meaning if
Yeah.
our data center goes down, then our
Yes.
services is going to go down. So rather than they have built another private cloud,
Yeah.
which is very expensive, they're like, we can use public cloud and
Okay.
only the services we need. So sometimes what happens is you might say, okay, we are going to be replicating our VMs, virtual machines in Azure. And
Yeah.
in case our private cloud goes down, we can bring the services in Azure in a timely
Okay.
fashion.
Wow,
And the cost is going to be uh, um, nominal because you're not
yeah.
investing in a full blown data center, right?
Yeah. That's really amazing. That's really, really amazing. Like
The
having your
other
own.
the other scenario I would say, and this happened really in the time of COVID, uh,
Okay.
when a lot of people were working from home, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Microsoft provide a lot of companies say, hey, we're going to provide VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, and
Okay.
Microsoft has their own virtual desktop infrastructure. It used to be called
Yeah.
Azure, but now it's like sorry, it used to be called Windows, uh,
Okay.
but now it's like Azure virtual desktop. And what that does is it is providing you like your own personal desktop,
Yeah.
right? For this to happen in a private cloud, you need a lot of compute, a lot of physical servers, a lot of
Okay.
storage. You
Yeah.
know, the other thing is if everybody is going to be accessing that, you need to have a large internet connection as well,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Microsoft, because of their data center, they provide huge amount of bandwidth as well.
Yeah.
So when you're in Azure, you're not going to see any slowness. You're not going to have any latency. It's not going to be
That's amazing.
right.
Yeah.
So those are the things that are built in. So that's the best scenario. A lot of people are saying, we're not going to be using anything uh, in our private cloud. We'll move,
Okay.
especially the VDIs, the virtual desktop infrastructure. We'll
Yeah.
use the compute in Azure. And
Okay.
again, the perfect scenario could be, let's say you have a contractor. Um,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
so I was doing consulting for a large bank, and
Yeah.
because banks are highly regulated entities, they send me a
Yeah.
physical device,
Yeah.
a physical laptop, right? And
Yeah.
I could only access the environment from their Azure environment from their physical laptop.
Yeah.
So the perfect scenario for this is now, rather than this investing $2,000-3,000 in that device, they can just
Yeah.
do the
Yeah. Just that desktop.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
uh, so now what happens is once the project is done, they don't have to worry about the device. They
Yeah.
can shut down the VM, and they don't have, and there's no ongoing cost. So
Yeah.
that's always a good scenario for Azure.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think there's one thing I would also love to ask you because you have so much knowledge on Microsoft Azure. And there's something I want to ask you is like, how did you get started in Microsoft Azure? Because you mentioned that in your former life, you were once a system administrator. So, what sparked your knowledge in Microsoft Azure? How did you get started?
Yeah, so I guess I was lucky when I moved to Canada in 2014. There was one of Microsoft large partners,
Yeah,
um, and they had an opening. I spoke with them; they were interested, and because at that time, because I came with a heavy on-prem background,
Okay.
it was a perfect opportunity for me because people knew the on-prem environment and they were reluctant to move to the cloud. So I can use
Yeah.
my previous experience to convince people to move to the cloud and show them, okay, what are the use case scenarios why you should move to the cloud.
Yeah.
But anybody who honestly wanted to get to the cloud, I would say just start learning. There's so much resources now. Look at
Yeah. There is.
YouTube. There's so many community members. Reach
Yeah.
out to anybody. They can actually start. And uh, Microsoft offers free
Okay.
Azure, subscription for some
Yeah.
time. And obviously, there's
Yeah.
going to be limited on the services, but that should give you a good idea of what needs to be done if you're looking at Azure, and
Yeah.
just start, playing around.
Yeah, even as a student too, like if you are listening to this podcast and you are a student, Microsoft Azure has Microsoft Azure for students, and they actually give you a subscription. Like you don't have to pay for it. So all you have to do is just to be ready to learn and also ready to build. And because there's nothing like when you are just reading, you can't just be reading, 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 and you are not building what you are reading. So yeah, so Microsoft Azure for students is there for you if you are a student. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
exactly. So there's so many different ways of doing that, right? So yeah. Plus, a lot of people have MSDN licenses, and there are different type of licenses, and then you get
Yeah.
X amount of dollars per month. You use that, utilize and start playing with it, and that's how you learn.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's how I learned. And one of the reasons I started my blog was people kept asking me the same questions again and again. So when I was
Yeah.
working for a Microsoft partner, they're like, how do you do this? Because they wanted to move their on-prem environment into Azure. So I'm like, okay, let me
Okay.
go through and uh, you know do a run book on this. So I pretty much um, build my blog. So
Okay.
and people just l- liked it because it made me a
Yeah.
screenshot of the process. So
Yeah.
if you want to learn, I would say start a blog. That's always
Yeah.
nice because then you're not only doing it, but you're also showcasing it too. And
Yeah.
then um, when you have to explain something to somebody, you learn better.
Yeah, you can even another thing too, you can direct the person directly to your blog. Like there's a blog, it shows you the step by step process. And I think there's one thing too I love about writing blogs is that you get to write about it. And maybe another day you're actually doing that same thing personally. You might just forget a step and you can actually return back to your blog.
That,
Yeah.
that, that's exactly it. Because
Yeah.
honestly, there's so much information now, like you cannot just keep everything there. So, and I've actually personally used my blog for references.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I'm like, oh yeah, I did this. How did I do that? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm just a step. So yeah, to your point, you can always go back and do it. And there's so much content, honestly, out there now. Like if you want to learn, you can learn. Reach out to people. The community is amazing.
Yeah,
People,
community is amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can always reach out to people who are there. People are able to help. And
Yeah.
cloud is going to grow. It's going to grow. People like
Yeah.
it's not stagnant
No,
because
it's not.
there's so many things coming out, and because of security and things, and try to specialize, because now we
Yeah.
have people who are just specialized in Kubernetes.
Okay.
So they're getting
Content.
specialized in that piece now. Some people are just getting specialized in IoT, because, as you
Okay.
know, IoT devices are coming out now.
Yeah.
There's going to be millions of
Azure
IoT
is,
devices.
Azure is really a lot. It's really, really big.
Exactly,
Azure
right?
is really big. Yeah.
So exactly, the use cases are endless. So
Yeah.
that's the thing. Once you get in, uh, it's going to be hard initially because you might get overwhelmed with the information. But
Yeah.
I would say start small,
Yeah.
focus just on compute, storage, networking, those things. If you
Okay.
master that, rest should be easy.
That's amazing. That's a really good advice
Yeah.
because Azure is kind of very, very overwhelming because there's so much to do, there's so much to learn. Azure has so many services that you don't, when you start, you're like, okay, where should I be? I'm done with the fundamentals because for the Azure fundamentals is like everything, just everything together. They are like, okay, after Azure, the fundamental, what next. So it's really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and the good thing is, it's all industry standard as well. So let's say
Yeah.
for networking, I did my Network Plus like 10 years ago, or actually no, 15 years ago.
Wow.
So those concepts are the same in Azure. If
Yeah.
somebody is doing networking on Cisco, they come into Azure, it's going to be the same, right? That's the
Okay.
beauty of
Yeah.
standardization, that networking is same across the board. It's not like you have to learn something new altogether.
That's really amazing then. Meaning one can transfer their knowledge from one cloud service to another.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I've also worked on AWS, and those skills are transferable because networking is networking. IP
Yeah.
address, subnets, those concepts are going to be the same. You
Yeah.
know, yeah. So once you master the basics, the foundation,
Yeah.
it regardless which cloud you use, you should be good to go. And honestly, now a lot of enterprise customers are moving into multi-cloud now.
Okay.
All the customers I'm talking to, they want to go into
Yeah.
multi-cloud because of redundancy as well, right? So they'll
Okay.
have
Yeah.
a presence in AWS and Azure or
Yeah.
GCP, because all these three clouds have a niche now. So,
Yeah.
like GCP still have, I would say, leg up, or it's niche on the ML side,
Okay.
machine learning and whatnot.
Yeah.
Microsoft AWS are catching up on the AI side as well.
Yeah.
So, like all of these public clouds are going to have a niche where you go. So, yeah, depending on the customers as well.
Yeah. Like depending on what they want or what they want to do. Yeah, it's amazing. I think another question I have to ask you is a cloud, you being a cloud solution architect, what does it take to actually be one? Like maybe someone is actually already starting, the person has already started their career, but they are looking forward to, okay, they are like, okay, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I want to be a cloud solution architect, but I do not know how to get there. So, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah,
Yeah,
honestly, that I don't know. Like cloud is moving so fast,
yeah,
that I don't even know if the cloud architect role is gonna even exist in 5 years. But
yeah,
uh, if you're there, just you know, here's my advice, and this might be a little bit weird, or like non-conventional advice. So
okay,
if you're looking for a role,
yeah.
go on LinkedIn, look at the role, what the job description is,
Okay.
and start acquiring those skills.
Well, that's really good advice. Yeah, true.
So if you're looking at a cloud architect role, go and see, okay, what are they asking for a cloud architect? If you're looking for a DevOps role, what kind of
Yeah,
skill set are they looking for? Like DevOps pipeline and other
yeah,
things, CI/CD, those kind of things. So, uh, because that really helps a lot of people when you are, because if you have the skill set, you'll get hired. So
yeah,
that's one
true.
of the things that I tell people: go look on LinkedIn and see what the
Yeah,
job descriptions are, and then you build a skill based on that.
yeah, that's really amazing. That's a very good advice. Getting to use the opportunity to get to use LinkedIn to check the job description. I think that's another thing too that a lot of people think about. They're like, okay, I want to learn about this particular platform, or I want to learn about this particular tool. So, should I go for it? Would there be job opportunities in this particular tool? So that's the thing. So LinkedIn is a very good place to start to actually check to see, okay, this is what this tool is. There are different jobs for this particular opportunity because I'm looking at it more in the perspective of Power Platform. I've seen a lot of questions where people ask me like, okay, if I learn Power Platform, will I get job opportunities in Power Platform? You understand?
See,
Yeah,
that's a tough question because it's like saying, okay, if I get a 4-year college degree, will I get a job? There's
yeah,
no guarantee. There's no guarantees in life because it depends on
yeah,
how, what you know, what is the level of expertise
yeah,
you have, right? And how much fast. So it's all about learning fast now. People are hiring today based on what you can learn,
Yeah.
not what you know. Okay?
Okay. That's true. Yeah. True.
Think about that for a second, because if what you know today is going to be obsolete tomorrow, because there's going to be something new.
Yeah.
So companies are hiring people who can learn fast, who
Yeah.
are willing to learn,
Yeah.
and
To
they're
learn.
like, yeah, I want to take challenges and whatnot. So, and
Yeah.
if you do not like learning, you do not want to be in the cloud or IT arena,
Yeah.
because yeah, you'll get burned out quickly.
Yeah, I think there's something somebody has said to me once. The person told me that concerning job opportunities, like if you see a job and you fit that particular role 100%, like everything 100%, then that job is not for you. You have to go for a different perspective right now. Like, okay, if you fit 50%, that is okay. You can apply for the job because you have an opportunity to learn. And apart from that, tech is very fast. Like things are happening every day. Yeah.
And honestly, to your point, I don't think so anybody now we can find a person who's going to know 100% about the job, because it's moving fast. It's like, think about it, even from a like DevOps standpoint, right? There's so
Yeah.
many different DevOps tools that
Okay.
no one person is expert.
Yeah. Sure.
So to your point, yeah, if you're 50% um, eligible to the job, apply. I would say apply. Always
Yeah.
apply to the job. You never know, because
Yeah.
people, again, companies are looking for attitude. You know, they're not
Ready
looking
to
at
learn.
what you know, how quickly you can learn, and they're looking for engagement. They're looking for what you're doing as well.
Yeah.
Because yeah, sure, people work from 9 to 5, but then are you involved in the community? Do you want to
Yeah.
learn? And that's why I love the community, because you can
Yeah.
talk to people, they can help you, they can
Yeah.
guide you, and they're willing to learn as well.
Yeah, another thing too, you get to see what others are doing. Like they are doing so much. A lot of people are doing so much, and things that you don't even know that is possible with maybe Microsoft Azure or with Microsoft Power Platform. You are seeing different persons doing that, and it's like an inspiration, and actually makes you curious on how can you do that. Yeah,
Yeah, and even for me, although I work with Azure, I don't know it all, and I'm
yeah,
learning on a daily basis. And sometimes I'm also learning from other people as well,
yeah,
because there's a project that they might have done, or a service that they might have used recently. So yeah, it's honestly it's a learning game. So you have to be humble as well.
yeah, yeah. It's very important. You have to be humble, and I think another thing too to understand is that maybe sometimes you might reach out to people and they do not reply you. That should not be a discourage. That should not make you be discouraged because a lot of people have many things going on, and they might also not have seen your messages. So that should not be a discouragement. Yeah, wanted to point that out.
Make sense? No,
Yeah, thank you so much, Abdul.
my
Thank
pleasure. No worries.
Yeah. Okay, so if for our listeners, I think you mentioned it before, but maybe for those who joined this live stream late, where can they get started with Microsoft Azure?
Yeah, as I said earlier, so you can get started with the AZ 900.
Yeah,
That is the perfect opportunity. And then Microsoft actually has the roadmap of the certification. So look at the certification roadmap. You want to start with the fundamentals, get
yeah,
the fundamentals, and then you can move on to the role base roles as well. So, even if you look at the role base roles, like their DevOps, their
yeah,
data, their AI, there's so
yeah,
many different things. So, but yeah, uh, get your fundamentals, master the fundamentals, and then go from there.
yeah, true, true. I think there's something you just mentioned that I would also love to ask you. Is that especially those who are just getting started, when they complete the Azure fundamentals, they write the certification, they have like an understanding of what Microsoft Azure is about the different areas in Microsoft Azure. So how do they branch into a particular part in Microsoft Azure?
That's a good question. So, I would say start with role-based certification.
Yeah,
The AZ 104 is usually the next step. Um, I've actually written a blog post on this, so I would
Okay.
say AZ 900, AZ 104, and then depending on where you want to go, because then you branch out, right? You can go into DevOps, you can become a developer. That's a
Yeah.
totally different thing. You can go into database, you can go into AI,
Yeah.
and honestly, the path is there based on the certification, and then also
Yeah.
where you stand, right? Depending on the company you're working for. So the company might say, hey, we don't have AI today, but do you want to lead this charge and build a
Okay.
practice on AI? We're like,
Yeah.
yeah, why not? And then that could be an opportunity for you to learn as well. So it really depends where you are in your journey. There's no
Yeah.
linear path, I would say, to
Yeah.
this.
Okay. That's amazing. I think for our listeners concerning the community, I don't concerning the Power Platform community, there are a lot of conferences happening, and few of them right now is the Nordic Summit happening this weekend, and also the Microsoft Power Platform conference and the South Coast conference happening in October. So check them out and try your best to attend. Yeah, and connect to the community.
Yeah, and then on that front, the Microsoft Ignite, which is one of the biggest
Yeah,
conferences, that's happening in November.
yeah,
So obviously, not everybody can be in Seattle. So
yeah,
Microsoft is also doing it virtually as well. So yeah, that's
yeah,
a great opportunity for people to learn about Azure
yeah.
and other products. It's not only limited to Azure, right? The
Yes,
Microsoft Ignite, it's all encompassing of the Microsoft products.
yeah,
So
sure.
yeah, that's another great way of learning
Yeah.
Azure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm definitely going to be attending visually. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Abdul. Thank you so much for discussing with me about Microsoft Azure, for sharing so much knowledge. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Bye. See you in
Thanks
the
a lot.
next
Bye
podcast.
now.
Yeah.